The last of the contract verbs you're going to encounter are the omicron contracts. So those verbs that end in, whose stems end in omicron, like delao, to show. Now the basic rules, again, these are going to follow largely the same idea as the other contracts, but we're going to have some basic differences in how various verbs contract. So we'll start with our omicron plus omega, as you would guess, lends us omega. So the long vowel swallows the short vowel. Then we get omicron plus omicron, and that's going to give us omicron upsilon, as will omicron and omicron upsilon. So again, the long swallows the omicron. And then we get a couple of strange situations. Omicron plus epsilon gives us So you'll notice there are three combinations that will give us omicron, 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 omicron upsilon, and omicron epsilon. And then finally, the strangest of them all is omicron and epsilon iota. Now you might guess that we're going to get something like but instead we get oi. So that omicron and epsilon iota gives us oi. This is not found very often. These are the most common. So let's take a look at how these work out. There's our luo. So looking ahead, you might say, okay, there might be an oi, there might be an oi. Otherwise, it looks like we're going to have a whole bunch of oos. And in fact, looking at it, de lo, accent rules just like for other contracts. De lo, de lois, there's our oi. De loi, de lumen, de lute, de lucin. So, just as you might have anticipated, that's how it contracts. Our present, middle, and passive. We've got omi, a, epsilon, omicron, epsilon, omicron. So we're going to get a lot of those oos throughout. De lumai, de loi, there's our oi. De lutai, de lumitha, de luste, de luntai. And let's take a look at this de lumitha just to see how the accent works. So, uncontracted, de la omitha. And if we were to accent it, it would be on that omicron, so 1, 2, 3. When we contract, de lumitha, you might expect, that's going to be a circumflex because that's the contraction, but in fact, it's got to be acute because we can't have a circumflex back three syllables. All right, so de lumai, de loi, de lutai, de lumitha, de luste, de luntai. On to the imperfect. So, eluon, elues, elue, eluomen, eluete, eluon. We basically have omicrons and epsilons, and if you go back to your rules, those all become oos, omicron upsilon, and there we have it. Edelun, edelus, edelu, edelumen, edelute, edelun. Just as you expected. Imperfect middle and passive. We've got omicron, remember omicron plus is epsilon, omicron, epsilon, omicron. So if you're anticipating, you'd say, it looks like all of these are going to be omicron upsilons. And in fact they are. Edelumen, edelu, edeluto, edelumitha, edeluste, edelunto. So start with that uncontracted form and contract. The rules are very consistent. Imperatives, delu, deluto, delute, delunton. So that is really throughout. And we would expect that based on this epsilon showing up in almost all of the imperatives except the third plural. But an omicron plus an omicron is an upsilon anyway. And in the middle and passive, same thing. Delu, delusto, deluste, deluston. So if you have to guess, and I'm not advocating guessing on something like a quiz or a composition, but if you have to guess and you know it's an omicron contract, omicron upsilon is a pretty safe bet. And finally, let's get the infinitives. De lune, right? Not necessarily what you would expect, because it's in your usual infinitive, it's ein. But again, like with the alpha contracts, there's something else happening here that we don't see in this ein. So de lune and de lusthai, which is what you would expect. So remember those rules. Remember that almost all patterns are going to end in u. So what ends in u? Well, we get our omicron and epsilon. We get our omicron, and we get our omicron and omicron upsilon. And then omicron and omega. The omega swallows the omicron. And then our omicron and epsilon iota gives us oi, which we saw only occurs in about three spots in the entire conjugation. Those are your rules.